Awakening, the Master Key to All Problems. This is our 8th class. And I'm going to do a quick kind of recap on what our last class was, lesson 7. And I'm looking forward to hearing what maybe some of your thoughts or experiences may have been with that lesson and the related exercise experience throughout the week. That last lesson was called The Rock and the Moss. And essentially, I see that last lesson as to me, what it showed me is how necessary a structure is for not only growth, but for existence itself. And so when I can really align with the idea that every single thing that's in this present moment, whether that's physical things or whether that's mental things like the structure of my ego or the structure of my own limitations and therefore all of my thinking, every structure on every level is literally even allows for the possibility of existence. And so when I can like align with that, when I can actually see how those things that sometimes I often will think is an obstacle or a problem or bad is literally the framework in which a present moment experience can exist. And so that's essentially what I think that last lesson did for me. I'm kind of curious what it may have done for how those words moved through anyone else, because it's a totally subjective experience. It could have been any number of things that was pulled from it or that any conclusions anyone drew. So I'm just kind of wondering what your guys' experience was with that last lesson.
I don't know if it's necessarily experience with the lesson, but this lesson was very present in my mind throughout the week.
How so?
Kind of like, like an alert that, okay, like this is where you're shifting from rock to moss. And this is what we were talking about. This is it. This is it. Just kind of repeating.
That's cool. Yeah, I noticed that a bunch too. Anyone else have anything to add to that?
I think this is Paul. I think
Hey, Sunshine, can you put that on mute? Cool, thank you.
Thank you, Sunshine. I don't know why it does that.
I don't know. I don't either.
I think it's because she's holding her cell phone.
Maybe.
Oh, that could be. I think, in a general sense, the lesson provided a point of focus, one being the rock, one being the moss, and the interaction between the two, which is kind of a symbiotic thing. And it gave us something to in our mind's eye look at and place our attention on and see what is there, instead of just sitting and thinking, wow, all of these things are part of my experience, part of me, and they create my present moment. And I see lots of I see a lot of things when I do that. But when I focus on the rock, the stone, I see the rock and the stone, and then I can go deeper into that, and I have a boundary. Since I'm in the rock, I have a boundary of my thoughts as I probe and look at what's in there, and that helped me to focus a little bit, which was really good. And so, and likewise with the moss, you can visualize the moss. You can think of it as a place that you are, and look out from there instead of looking into the rock. And so it was a really cool visual tool to aid in focus. That's kind of my general thought about the lesson.
That's cool.
I've had for a while a pretty good, reckoning about the fact that your past creates how you respond to things, and That's something that I've used, as a school administrator working with staff and parents and dealing with situations there, that they're also working from their experiences. So that's something I had a good concept of and understanding of. But I think the rock and moss thing was a lot, kind of maybe what he was saying, a lot less abstract. It's like a visual, physical picture, like it really like hit home. That is exactly what it's like. Mm-hmm. So it just gave a more physical reckoning of what it actually looks like and is for me.
Mm-hmm. Images are amazing like that.
Well, once there, you can test it. You can say, okay, what is it about a rock? What are the features of a rock? What are the aspects of a rock? Well, first, it's really old. I mean, if you're a rock, you've been around for a long time, and so it goes way back. And secondly, it's fairly stable. And I'm not thinking some uranium or something like that. I'm thinking of a rock, like that image that you posted. That was a pretty cool rock, totally, by the way, Brian.
I know. Thank you, Google.
It looks stable. Looks like it's been there a long time, and it's not going anywhere. Mm-hmm. It's not going to change. It is not going to evolve much. It's just kind of what it is. It is what it is.
Yeah.
And you can't go back and change it. You can't go back and modify it. You can't go back and alter it. And you can't ignore part of it and look at some other part of it because, you're not seeing the whole rock. Mm-hmm. So all kinds of little attributes
to
that analogy that really are powerful. So that the moss gave me more trouble, but we'll get into that. But,
cool.
But yeah, the rock is something else again.
What kind of trouble? I mean, we can stay with the rock for a minute. Yeah, it is kind of cool seeing like past experiences or that we may have labeled bad, or even our limitations or ego or whatever, at whatever level we're looking at it, as something so stable like a rock that it's unchangeable. So therefore it's like we don't have to pick at it all day long. We don't have to mess with it. We can just look forward and move forward from that point of which we're at to create the new experience. So yeah, seeing the rock as something super stable and kind of unchangeable, like you're saying, is super valuable. I see it as that too. As far as this moss part, what was some of the kind of difficulty with recognizing what or where the moss was, I guess?
Well, when I turned my attention to the moss, I just saw a multitude of like rays or light or possibilities or directions or places to go, or it was almost unlimited. It seemed to be, you could look even further, even in a small piece of moss, you could look down into a very close, like macroscopic level, and there's still deeper places to look. There's still more things that maybe you don't see right away, but they're there. So I started thinking, well, this is like taking a look at infinity. Mm-hmm. You can't capture it all. You can look at it and look at wonderful possibilities and say, okay, that's encouraging. And the problem was, and it's been a problem for me for a long time, Brian, is trying to decide, okay, where do I want to go? Hmm. Who do I want to be? What path do I want to focus on of all of these possibilities? And that's where I just break down, trying to establish or to create a path or to create a choice on where I go from here. Hmm. I see the possibilities, and it's like there's no restriction, mm-hmm. which is really cool unto itself, for sure. But then I say, okay, what about me personally? And I'm thinking, I'm just overwhelmed. I don't even know where I want to go. And so I sort of stubbed my toe at that point.
Yeah. That's fascinating. Does anyone have any thoughts about that?
Well, we do have a myriad of choices in front of us. many of which are very alluring, and it can be reminiscent of a blind dog in a meat house at times. And, so many choices that
Right.
we could choose from. And the big question is, which are the ones that will be the most spiritually fulfilling?
Yeah, that's a good point. I like that. Even so, it seems like my experience with being the Moss, or my experience with, as I was referring to it more as, in a more relatable way, the creative intelligence, my creative intelligence doesn't really feel like it has many choices in moving forward, which is interesting because you're saying that your creative intelligence, Paul, feels like it has too many choices, is one way you could say it, or at very least, like you said, you don't know which way you want to go. And so my experience with that is I feel like due to everything that my life has been, it's like I deliberately try to draw a line from like where my life has been to where it is now, and continue to build upon that. And so I see a trajectory that I'm wanting to fulfill. I see a trajectory that my momentum wants to fulfill. And so I almost wonder if maybe it sounds like you're at a point to where you're wondering, it's like, which way should I go now? Well, maybe so it almost kind of sounds like there's a letting go or pushing away of what has, what you have been before and what you have done before, which I think can be really good in order to, that's a great kind of mentality. It's like, I'm going to do something different. I'm going to go somewhere different. However, I can see there not being any direction when we're at a point in our life like that. And so I almost say, grab a hold of the history of momentum, grab a hold of what you have been in the past. You're taking that with you, not every part of it the way you were, but right here where the rock is, that is the thing that you're taking with you. So as far as like this point of rock, where you're going, where your creative intelligence is going to go in the future, there's still kind of direction from really the direction that rock is pointing you in. So maybe, I don't know what that might even do within your own thinking, but it seems like your direction, my direction anyway, seems to can continue to point me in a particular way. It's almost like a constant building upon what has been in the past. It's a constant building upon, and so even if your past was something really bad, well, you can still build upon what that really bad thing was and use that as wisdom to help people with that bad thing in the future, whatever it may be. There's always a constant building upon that can happen. What does your thoughts kind of do with that, Paul?
Well, when you were talking, one of the gentlemen in our group, and I don't remember who it was, used the word, try to find your nature. And when you talk about momentum and trying to attach a line to that, what is that momentum pointing towards? The word nature, your own
Totally.
personal nature, sort of encapsulates that idea for me. And because it really was a powerful suggestion. I think it was last week, maybe.
Yeah.
It's like, where are you tending to go? Where have you tended to go? Have there been some boundaries and you're staying within a certain boundary, and where does that point? And then consider, well, maybe it's illustrating my nature with all the things in that rock. There may be a momentum. That word momentum is pretty good. That's tending toward a certain direction. And then if I'm visualizing looking at that and saying, okay, now hold on to that. I'm going to turn around and look at the moss and see what I see.
Mm-hmm.
Hold that thought. Now turn around and look at the moss, and plot a course.
Yeah. What do you think about that? Because if you don't do that, we are essentially starting over at infancy again. But you can take your wisdom with you.
With that, go ahead, Paul.
Well, no, please, I'll hold my thought.
Well, I just get this visual when you're kind of talking about turning around, and looking at the moss as, I see moss a lot of times, especially when it's, growing, that there's holes through it and, you can kind of see through it. And I just see, like, when you're talking about momentum and what's your tendency, that you're, you might see through the moss this way, and you might see through the moss that way, and there could be different ways that you could go. So I just see like a visual, like of rays of things coming through the moss, and where you're going to go with that rock basis foundation you've got all kinds of paths that you could go out of that moss. Mm. I just get a visual like that.
Mm-hmm.
About 5 years ago, I started looking into spiritual things, and there's St. Louis is ripe with different opportunities for that. I discovered, and I went to all kinds of classes, lots of different things. And I spoke to my brother. I have an older brother who's an author. He's a Wiccan priest of some sort. I don't know how that all works, but I asked him. I said, well, how do you know what is right for which way should I go? And he said, well, your gut is going to know, and which is like your nature is going to know.
Right.
Follow that. And I thought he was going to be a proponent of one thing versus another, but he was not. Mm. He wasn't directing me at all. He just said, look at yourself, look at what your gut's telling you, and follow that. And that's just another way of thinking about it, I guess.
This just came to my mind while you were talking in regard to that is, what do you believe you're here to do, and what resources do you have to do that? And to me, that would be the direction that I would head in. What do I believe I'm here to do or fulfill, and what resources do I have personally to fulfill that?
I also think if you can step back and really think about what your gut is telling you versus listening to what everybody else is telling you should
totally that's
it. Get that out of your head, and I think that's sometimes hard to do, is to get everybody else's ideas of what your life should look like and what you should do, and just sit in your thought processes. I think that's sometimes hard.
My favorite recommendation yet. Sit in your own energy. I think it'll tell you. Does anyone else have any thoughts on either this or maybe your own experience with how this rock moss image lesson moved through you this week? What about you, Carolyn? Did you have any experiences with that this week?
Mostly just in terms of the structure aspect. Like I've mentioned before, I have tried at various times to abandon temporarily certain things that I knew were helpful, kind of just to see what would happen, and it didn't last long, didn't end well. try to move from the rock to the water, and no.
Right. Yeah, man, it sounds like growing pains. Yeah, I understand. Any other thoughts on that to give a more whole perspective of what all the different experiences we could have with this idea of the rock and the moss? There's a couple people I had in mind that I was curious what their thoughts about it were. Like Lynn, you for instance. I don't mean to call people out necessarily. There's a couple people I was particularly interested in what their thoughts were about it. Lynn or Kara, maybe, if you have any, I'd love to hear. Or Ashley. Everyone, really, but this was an interesting image to me. And I think because it was so, there was an image that, and that could be applied to wherever we apply it to in our daily experience. It could very well be different for everyone. Essentially, there's two parts, rock and moss. And so, however, it's like due to our own individual kind of mission or our own individual purpose, our own individual personality, our own individual uniqueness, we will create the this and the that. We'll create the rock and the moss at that unique area within what we're trying to understand in our lives. And so, so this experience of the rock and moss could be completely different for anyone. We're all kind of like discovering something within our own experience. It's very unique for us. And so I'd love if anyone else had any other thoughts to contribute about what this rock and the moss could mean or could be. Okay. In that case, I want to ask this question before we move on to the next lesson as well. This question is our little like official exercise / journal prompt that we did last week, which was experiment with being the rock at times, which is, in our analogy in this lesson, was what is, and then experiment with being the moss at times, which is the creative intelligence that creates off of what is. So there's those two things. And then also the strange little addition to this is experiment with being the space in between those two, meaning having awareness of both the rock and the moss as we move throughout our lives, as we move throughout our day. And then journal your findings. So really this was just a breakdown kind of format to experiment with what this might mean. I wanted to give anyone who maybe had a direct experience with the exercise or journaling a chance to share anything that they've found. I have a question for you guys. Did anyone find what I would say, what I would call neutrality through this investigation? Did anyone find a space of neutrality through the peeking into or between the rock and the moss? Because if we really see something as stable and unmovable, then that gives us a chance to get used to it. Yes, Sunshine.
I experienced that both were, I guess, in essence, equal.
Cool.
Like, I used to see them as, I guess, more like good, bad, black, white thinking. Pleasure and pain sort of thing. Mm-hmm. But this week, they felt equal. It was just part of the flow.
Yeah, I think that's ideal too. Part of the flow. They're both equal. Because they are. You can't have one without the other. that's what I loved about this is when you really see that they're both equal and you can't have one without the other. It's like oftentimes we can get heavy on one side. We can get heavy on maybe wanting stillness, or get heavy on maybe the way things staying the way they are, or get heavy on the other side, which is like get heavy on growth, or get heavy on change, or get heavy on the possibility of what the future could be. But in reality, both of those things couldn't exist without the other, and because they couldn't exist, whichever side you don't weigh on as heavily, you could start to see more of the value in, and thus come to a more neutral place with whatever all of our experiences are. And so that was the real potential for me in this lesson, was realizing, kind of like Sunshine was saying, the equalness of them, and how none of this could even exist without both sides.
I kind of like the word neutral.
Mm-hmm.
Equal, for me, when I think of equal, I think of a mathematical concept, or a quantity, or something you can measure. Is it the same as something else you can measure? And what helps me is, when you said the word neutral, was I found a point of balance. And I think that did work through most of the week this week, where there wasn't a leaning too far one way or the other way. There was more of a balance this week, personally, and which I was really grateful for. And neutrality, equilibrium. If you look at a graph of a line, and you pick a point on that line, and you could pick it up, and it doesn't tip one way or the other way. It just kind of sits there. It doesn't lean. It covers everything. And last week you mentioned the phrase "the universe," and when I think of the universe, I think of, I mean, that's everything. So you couldn't have it out of balance if you're incorporating everything. And so neutral really rings when you use that word.
Totally. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's kind of been the theme of this whole class too. It's like, it's the including of everything. And when you don't include everything, things start to seem out of balance, or not what our preference would be, or bad or wrong or a problem. But then when you start to include everything else, then all of a sudden it's like, oh, actually, none of this could essentially be any other way than it is in this moment. Granted, it will totally be something else in the next moment, and in the next week, in the month, year, decade, life, whatever. But in this moment, it's all completely so supported and is existence itself. And to me, it's like, at first that could seem like I could see how that could easily seem like that would be my nightmare, is for nothing to be able to be any other way. But the thing is it's already that way. And so it's just like accepting the conditions of our life, so that way we can actually be the moss and the creative intelligence, and actually move our life forward. Realistically, I think sometimes we can not actually be the moss whenever we have those ideas that I wouldn't want things to not be any other way. It's because we're not even taking charge of our life. We're not even being the moss. We're not being the creative intelligence that will literally move that of which is forward. And so I think it highlights the importance of both, like recognizing and accepting things as they are, and also being that dang creative intelligence, that one who's in charge of your life and actually moving it forward. They're just both so important and essential. And whenever we, I think, can find that balance, that neutrality, then we don't mind recognizing that, oh, in this very second, things couldn't be any other way, because literally this is the way it is. Does anyone have like what comes up in your thinking whenever we say words like things couldn't be any other way than they are in this moment? I mean, even though we all get it conceptually, it's like clearly this body's here, clearly this desk is here, it couldn't be any other way because this is the way it is. But things come up in our thinking that is a problem sometimes whenever we hear things like that. So I'm just kind of wondering, in your own unique experience, kind of what comes up as a barrier to that in your own thinking. Anybody? Or maybe there is no barrier. Things couldn't be any other way. To me, that brings silence into my experience. It starts to bring in a spaciousness around me. Whereas when I believe things should be different right now, or could be different right now, then that populates my mind with tons of busyness. And that produces start to be repelled against. I start to not want what is. I start to resist what is when I think it could be different. It's a difficult path sometimes, though, to get there. There are many layers to be able to rest in that neutrality that we're talking about. Even though we can lay it out like this and clearly see that, oh, this is clearly the way things are right now, so you couldn't snap your fingers and then be different. There's a moving forward that has to occur from the point at which we're at. Even though we get that conceptually, there still are layers to unraveling that, so that way we can actually have that experience of neutrality. So I was just wondering if anyone had anything to share as far as what some of their experience with that idea might be.
I'm just thinking if you're not happy, content, sitting, I'm using that word a lot tonight, sitting, but if you're not in and happy where you're at, it's going to be hard to get where you want to go someday. You know, if you are striving to grow, and we're always growing somehow, but like if you're not content right now where you're at, and your mind's unsettled, that you're going to struggle getting there more than if you're just settle in where you're at and try to move forward.
It's so true, but we get stuck in that place sometimes. It's like, how do I be content with what is? How do I be content with my terrible life right now, you know?
Oh, I know.
Yeah. Well, actually, I hope that this next lesson actually fills in that gap right there a little bit. We can go ahead and move on to that next lesson, actually. The next lesson is called, let's see here. It is called Lesson 8, Stability, Loving All the Shapes of Your Life. So I could see how this next lesson would at least be a tool to start working with the what isness of our life, to be able to find the neutrality or the acceptance of the way our life currently is, as a kind of tool to begin to peel back some of those layers and actually be able to rest in the way that our life currently is. So I could see this lesson kind of really fitting the bill for what we were talking about. So let's see what happens. I will share it. I'm particularly excited about this lesson because each one has been you could say a kind of response to the lesson before. It's like each lesson poses an idea that there's more that needs to be covered each time a new idea is presented. And so this one is a response to what we did in the last lesson in order to continue to dive deeper. So once again, this one's called Stability, Loving All the Shapes of Your Life. And as you guys have noticed, the beginning of each one of these lessons, we kind of do a small recap just to repopulate our minds with what the previous structure we were working with was, what the previous lesson was. And so, can everyone see this lesson, by the way? Awesome. So, here we go. In the last lesson, we investigated the absolute necessity of a structure for growth to occur. We found that if there wasn't a structure, like a rock, there wouldn't be the possibility of growth, like moss, to exist, to push against, reason from that point, and build from. This includes everything in our lives, even the framework of our ego, limiting beliefs, the other apparent obstacles in our life or on the spiritual path. They are the structures of that which currently is a stable platform for growth and forward motion to even occur. This paints all of our life experiences in a new light. It changes what we often call bad in our lives or problems to a necessity of existence. And I put in bold letters the things that were particularly important for that paragraph. In this lesson, however, we'll experiment with building a new relationship, and that's what this whole lesson is about, is building a new relationship with what is, or building a new relationship with the structure, the rock of our lives. So this really is the question that we were just posing a moment ago. I'm going to continue reading. Whatever shape, it's referred to as a shape, whatever shape the rock of this moment takes, and here's the thing, experiment with seeing it as not only a stable place on which to grow from, but also unchangeable. To build a new relationship with the shape of each moment, we need to see it as unchangeable, stable, solid. So in order to even do this, in order to even build a new relationship with the shape that the moment of our lives has taken, to build a new relationship with the shape of our lives, we'll define exactly what shape means here in a moment. But in order to even begin to build a new relationship with what our lives is, we need to see it as unchangeable. So we can actually have some time with it. Unchangeable, stable, solid, so that we can begin spending the time with it that will reveal the value not yet seen. Because when we think each moment is one problem after another, or think it could be different now, we disconnect from the stability that the moment can offer. And I think that sentence is just so profound, because we really easily identify with the moss, meaning our creative intelligence, our free will, the way that we can move and shape our life. However, when we are not what we could call in that thin space between the rock and the moss, meaning also connected to the moment itself, the shape of the moment itself, then we disconnect from the stability that the moment can offer. So I'm going to read that whole sentence again. When we think each moment is one problem after another, or think it could be different now. So this is kind of getting haywire with the moss side of things, getting haywire with the free will or creative intelligence side of things. when we do that, we disconnect from the stability that the moment can offer. It's like we really want stability in our lives, is why we're going to haywire, so to speak, with our creative intelligence and free will, because we really want stability. But stability, we want things to be better, and I'm calling that stability. Stability comes from the moment itself. The moment can offer that of which you're looking for, the moment itself. So in this lesson, we're learning to build a new relationship with the moment, with the shape of the moment. I'm going to continue on. Often we do this because the distance from what we want, so oftentimes whenever we see life as one problem after another, or think things could be different now, it's often because we often do this because the distance from what we want and what is too far. It's too painful. So then we tried to build from should-bes, like we've talked about before, or force ideals where there currently hasn't been a structure built to support these ideals. This highlights the importance of being clear on exactly what constitutes the rock in our analogy, since it's so easy to flip into this overemphasis on creative intelligence, free will, and I can do whatever kind of thing. When we believe even some small part of the moment might not be a part of what constitutes the rock. When we believe, I'm going to say it again, when we believe even one small part of existence, one small part of the moment might not be part of what constitutes the rock, we find ways to break down. This process of building a new relationship with the moment. We break this relationship building down in the name of fixing things, in the name of free will, in the name of doing something to fix this problem of which things are right now. So here we're going to define in this next paragraph what exactly constitutes the rock. And the last lesson, we basically just presented the idea that there's a structure or a foundation in which everything in existence is. In this lesson, we're going to be even more clear on what that structure or foundation is, what we're calling the rock. I'm going to read on. The rock is everything perceivable in a present moment. The rock is everything perceivable in a present moment. Everything perceivable. Can you perceive it? That's part of the rock in this analogy. And I highlighted this in bold because it's so important. Truly, this rock is always moving and reshaping. So like the present moment isn't a completely stationary thing. It is always moving and reshaping, both physically, emotionally, mentally, on all levels. It's always reshaping. I'm going to read this again. Truly, this rock is always moving and reshaping because it includes even our thoughts, which are always forming into new shapes, constantly. Even our emotions are included in this present moment snapshot, called the rock, along with our bodies and all other people and things in the world in a present moment. Everything perceivable in a present moment. Now, imagine all three of these levels, thought, emotion, and physical, all creating one shape we are calling rock. So this is calling us to become aware of all levels of experience, all levels of mind, all levels of creation at the same time. Or what we could call physical, what we could call emotional, what we could call mental. Be aware of these all at the same time. And this is what we're calling the rock. And all three of these levels create a shape, you could say. And you don't have to like name the shape or anything like that, but just be aware of all three of these levels at the same time and recognize in the present moment they are the shape, they are the solid structure of the present moment itself. They are the rock. And it's stabilizing for us to ground on that, to just be aware of all these levels at the same time. I'm going to continue on. In this moment, this rock is one shape, and in the next it is another, and so on. However, while this rock is the shape it is, know it to be that shape. And simply, we know that the shape is always going to be moving. All three levels are constantly moving, and sometimes rapid degrees and sometimes slower degrees. But the thing is just to be aware of the shape that it is in the moment that you're aware of it in. I'm going to continue on. And now, know it to be solid, stable, and even unchangeable in the moment it is there. This shape is existence itself. That's such a fascinating line to me every time we talk about that. Necessary just as it is. I mean, so even right in there, it's like the shape is existence itself, necessary just as it is. We so easily judge the different shapes, whether it's what's happening on a physical level, what's happening on an emotional level, what's happening on a thought level. We very easily judge that, but when we really start to see that it is existence itself, then it's easier for us to step back from it and just see it as the rock structure of existence that it is. We can, period. I'm going to continue on. It is helpful to see our present moment experience as necessary. So necessary that without it, there would not be existence. If you can get to that place with seeing the present moment, then you're going to be so stable. You're going to be so grounded into something that is powerful, into actual reality itself. Getting a glimpse of this stability before this moment passes into the next moment is the power that the moment itself can offer. Heck, man, that one should have been underlined too, or in bold. I'm going to read it again. Getting a glimpse of this stability, of the shape of the moment, before this moment passes into the next, is the power that the moment itself can offer. And there is a stabilizing power in that. I'm going to read on. Just the awareness of this, just remembering the most simple part of this idea, even in the next painful or challenging situation, helps to make that subtle shift from problem or bad to stability. Remembering in the moment, rock. That's all we have to do. The most simple idea, that's all we're looking for. Remembering in the moment, rock. Only simple things really work well. This is just a rock. Remembering that this moment is just a rock. Rock is all we need to remember. When we remember rock, we can remember that without this current rock, i.e. challenge, problem, or anything that's arisen, existence would not be there. This is life. It is real. It is solid, and it is there like a rock. It is happening now. I'm going to continue on. A rock is stabilizing. It is supportive. Step aboard. Stand on it. No need to chase it away. So this is the shape of our life that's happening on all three levels. That is the shape of the rock at the moment. Step aboard. Stand on it. No need to chase it away. You are this rock. You are this moment. You are life. The shape of your life currently is a stable rock, and it always is a stable rock. Our trick, our goal, is to build a new relationship with each stable rock, each shape of the moment as it presents itself. When we build a new relationship with each moment, then we are stable. We are rock solid. I'm going to continue on. The last paragraph says, this attentiveness to the moment on all levels is how we build a new relationship with the varying shapes of our lives. So there are so many varying shapes. It's always moving and shifting and reshaping. It's a beautiful thing. And so to say it's a rock might be a little strange at first, but that's the way in which we have to build a relationship with it. Something has to be stable to even put our attention on it, to be attentive to it, to build a new relationship. So we have to see the ever-changing shape as of the present moment as a rock. I want to read that sentence again. This attentiveness to the moment on all levels, mental, emotional, physical, is how we build a new relationship with the varying shapes of our lives. When we build a new relationship with each shape our life takes, we are empowered with a new energy. An energy that allows us to see value in what we fought to fix before. It's so funny because we think we need to fight to fix it in order to make things good. But actually the good, what I'm calling the new energy, allows us to see the value of what we fixed before. And whenever we fight, I'm going to read that sentence again because it's so important. When we build a new relationship with each shape our life takes, we are empowered with a new energy just by building a relationship with the shape of the rock our life is. It's an energy that allows us to see value in what we fought to fix before, which takes our power away. When we fight to fix, it takes our power away. But when we build a new relationship, it gives us an energy. And I'm going to read on. This energy could be referred to as love. Love. That is the new relationship with your life, with yourself. A new relationship of loving yourself. It's interesting because the shape that our present moment takes on all levels, physical, emotional, and mental, we don't often consider it ourself. But we're putting it into a structure we're often calling rock. We're putting it into a shape that, meaning just aware of it all three levels and calling that us. And so essentially what we're building a new relationship with, which is everything perceivable in the moment that comes up, is ourself. The shape of ourself in that moment. How does this move in you guys?
There's a meditation I do kind of regularly, and it's a yoga nidra. And the sankalpa, which is the thing you're supposed to say to yourself or whatever, is I love myself as I am in this moment now. So that's
Totally.
That's what it sounds like to me anyway.
Absolutely.
This one, I got it a lot better than the last.
Good. I'm so thankful. That's important, yeah. Things aren't very helpful if we don't quite get it, so I'm glad that this one made sense. What about the rest of you guys? How did this move in you, this idea?
I found that the allegorical symbology was interesting. It's not a way that I would normally envision it. When I'm contemplating things like this, I tend to avoid words and think in simply spiritual concepts. You know, English doesn't serve well. The spoken language doesn't serve well to convey these concepts. I tend to do it on a little non-language level with mental whatevers.
Totally.
So then the contemplation and analysis goes a lot more smoothly when I do that.
Mm-hmm. And here's, I think, especially when things aren't going so smoothly, that's the point in which a new relationship would be helpful to be built. And so thought happens. We all think, and sometimes those thoughts that think themselves essentially don't go so smoothly. And so starting to see those things, even the ones that do go smoothly, but particularly the ones that aren't, as all one shape to build a new relationship with, is, yeah, you're right, a completely different way of approaching things. Normally we see those levels as independent experiences. And so then the thing about that is, though, is we're always shucking and driving those 3 levels, trying to make them be a particular way for us to be comfortable, happy, or content. But when we start to see each shape as one thing in which we're building a new relationship with, then not only does that awaken us in all levels of mind and all levels of experience, but also it makes us invincible and not needing those 3 levels to be any particular way. But yeah, Stan, you're totally right. Whenever our thinking is moving in a more fluid way like that, that has to do with not so much even words, but like spiritual, what you're calling spiritual concepts, in not so much a word way, then, I mean, thumbs up right there if you feel it's working for you. And then also, there is the and even in those moments, really, there could be a different way to perceive what's happening in our experience whenever we look at it, when we awaken in those 3 levels like that, and build a new relationship to all that being one thing. That's not a way we normally look at it. Normally we see them as independent, like I got to get my physical world right, and then I'm someone who has a personality and thinks, and there's this level of thing, and basically feel that experience is a separate thing than what we're trying to create out here. But what if we didn't have a linear life like that? What if we didn't have essentially this idea we're always working with of past and future? But when these ideas of past and future arose, saw them as the part of the shape of the present moment itself. This is literally the stepping out of, the escaping of time. This is stepping out of, this is freeing ourselves from whatever pains usually come from the difficulties with time, and recognizing it all as one shape of the present moment. And build a new relationship with that shape. So how do we build a new relationship? For instance, it's pretty easy to make decisions based on what your emotional experience is, what you feel. It's like, okay, I feel hungry, so on a real basic level, let's say I feel hungry, and so we're going to correct that feeling, we're going to fix that feeling by changing ourselves, by putting food into ourselves, that way we can feel different. That level, things make sense. It seems like that's pretty rational. But we do this on very subtle levels with all other different ways that we feel. And therefore, that means we have one way, essentially, that we prefer to feel. Now, if we only have one way that we prefer to feel, or a few ways that is our preference to feeling, then that means all the other parts of feeling we are not going to be content with. We're going to have experiences of being dissatisfied and even it being downright unacceptable. And so by learning to build a new relationship, say with anger, for instance, just by seeing anger as part of the shape of the physical, part of the shape of the emotional, and part of whatever thoughts that might come up in the mental, by seeing that shape there as a solid rock, then we can actually, instead of trying to get rid of it, and then so that way we can be happy, we can actually just build a different relationship with it. So that way we can be happy. And how do we build a different relationship with it? But to be attentive to it, to put our attention on it, meaning not trying to figure out, not setting the mind into motion, trying to figure out how I can make what I need to do to make this feeling different. But instead, being attentive to the shape of the moment itself, which already puts you head over heels, head over shoulders in advantage, because you're seeing everything that's perceivable from a point of awareness, from a point of a greater vantage point. Now, when we aren't seeing everything as one shape, when we're not seeing everything, the physical, emotional, and mental as one shape, when we're not doing that, and instead we're immersed in figuring things out in order to make things better, is essentially how we're shucking and jiving most of the time. When we're in that, we're identified with things being a problem. We're identified with our conditioning. We're identified with that level of experience. But when we stop for a moment and once again see the physical, emotional, mental as one shape, then all of a sudden we're not those things. And we are that of which is observing those things. And there's enormous head and shoulders amount of freedom just in doing that. But we're not going to stop just there, because we're going to build a new loving relationship with each shape, because the moment's always taking a new shape. And why would we want to be only happy and content on just the few shapes that we are okay with? Instead, let's build and start to see the value in all the possible shapes, because realistically, every emotion, every experience is necessary and has its place and value for that of which it is there for. Everything, once again, like we've talked about in past lessons, is an amalgamation of things propelling to things forward. So nothing is bad or wrong. We're just here to build a new relationship with the shape of the moment, so that way we don't get caught up in thinking it's bad or wrong, and we can be happy and or content in all moments or ways that the moment shapes itself to be. So you can definitely start with small things first. A small discomfort, a small, quote, emotion or feeling. And after we start to learn the capacity that we have, and we start to learn of the capacity that we actually do have to build a new relationship with the shape of the moment, when we actually learn the power or capacity that we actually do have to build a new relationship with that shape, then we can do it with stronger emotions. And I particularly recommend doing it outside of the experience of people, like doing it by yourself at first with smaller feelings or emotions, being attentive to the shape of the moment on all levels, and which really being attentive to the shape, the attentive part is the building the new relationship. Instead of trying to figure out how to change this moment, just the being attentive to the shape of the moment is the process of building a new relationship. So I recommend to try it with smaller emotions first, smaller discontentments. And then as you realize the power and capacity that you have to do this, then you can move it to not only bigger emotions and bigger problems, but actually in the very moment of challenges, in the very moment of our most intense emotional experiences with people. But we got to realize how this works and the power and capacity that we do truly have with this on smaller levels first. Does anyone have any thoughts or questions or maybe points that need some clarification? Or points they see being difficult or needing clarified within how they see it moving in their own lives? So I guess the image for this time, like last class, it was the space between the rock and the moss. So the image was a rock and moss, and I guess the image for this time is just a rock. I mean, there is the element of the moss of forward motion of growth, but that's not what the focus is this week. The focus is stabilizing ourselves and essentially loving ourselves by building a new relationship with literally the structure that we are, with literally the rock. And so the image for this week, once again, just like last week was the rock and the moss, this week is just the rock itself. The image this week is just a rock. However, the interesting thing about this rock this week is you could say that this rock is always mutating. This rock is this shape sometimes, real long, and or maybe it's real small, or maybe it's real perfectly huge and round, whatever the shape. And really, we don't need to get stuck on any kind of shape, because that's not the point of it, is like defining any kind of shape. Just recognizing the abstractness of the physical, emotional, and mental as being all one thing is the point. And so maybe this week the image to hold in mind is a rock that's kind of always morphing in shape, that is all levels of our experience. Kind of like Sunshine said earlier, I think it's a lot easier to not only comprehend but have an experience with throughout the week when it's super simple. And so last week was just an image of a rock and moss, and this week it's a mutating rock. It's a rock that's always shifting shapes. That's the one thing we need to hold in mind this week.
This just makes me think about a past experience of mine.
Yeah.
I've mentioned in other classes about a past relationship that had a lot of emotional abuse in it.
Yeah.
And I think back to that, and for an extremely long time, it was just constant turmoil and worry and stress, and you're listening to all these people and their opinions and what you should do. And I remember distinctly that it wasn't until I finally just quit listening to all that and quit even in my head telling myself all these things. And if you can be, I don't know that it was a content or settled in the situation that I was, but it wasn't until I let all that turmoil that was just beating my brain up that I actually was able to move past that situation and figure out how to get myself out of that situation. But it took a very long time because you're so wrapped up in that feedback.
Yeah.
Somehow I was able at some point to just settle my brain about it and let it go, and it was just like, I can't change this. You've been trying to change this, you try to make this different than what it is, and you can't. So this is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
It was not until I finally just said, this is how it is, was I able to change it, actually, and develop, a different mindset about how to handle it, actually. So that made me think about that.
Totally.
Yeah.
And I think even while I was writing this a couple times, I thought, this kind of reminds me of acceptance. This kind of reminds me of Shara's experience that she shared before. Because she shared that at that point of change is whenever she actually came to complete acceptance of the nature of the situation. And so this, what I'm offering tonight, the lesson tonight is really kind of a platform to accelerate exactly what you're talking about. It's like, we often in those situations don't really even realize that we need that what coming to a point of acceptance can do for us, how coming to a point of acceptance can accelerate the process. Because it's really easy to think that, oh, I need to be fixing this, I need to be figuring something out, I need to moving in that direction. Whereas oftentimes this point of acceptance can really accelerate the change that we're really looking for. I love that, Shara. Thanks for sharing that. I thought that too.
I don't know about anybody else, but I really enjoyed the text pictures of the rock and moss.
Right.
I got giddy every time I saw it. I love rocks.
I like the one that Kara shared too. That tree.
What's that?
I like the one that Kara shared too, with the tree that looked like a face almost, that had moss on it.
I liked the rock the best.
Yeah, that was a beautiful rock. Does anyone else have any thoughts about this new lesson? Maybe if there's no questions about it, of any challenges might come up against when applying it to our lives this week. Is there any immediate value that's seen in really bringing awareness to all of these 3 levels that we're defining here, as being one present moment experience instead of separate experiences? Hey Ashley, I hate to call anyone out, but what are your thoughts about this? Do you have any immediate thoughts that come to mind when you hear these crazy ideas in this new lesson? Nope, she don't have any thoughts. No thoughts. Well, good. Okay, well, in that case, let me show you guys the present my screen one more time, and we'll go over the homework, or the practices rather, for this week for applying what we just discussed in this lesson. There are only 2 this time, and let me know. Can you guys see the screen? Thumbs up, great, thank you. Okay, so there's read the lesson like always, every day when possible, in the morning, in the evening, and in different moods. That's so important, the different moods thing. Even if you only do it once or twice throughout the week, it's like seeing these words in a different experience, especially with this lesson, since it's all about emotions, since it's all about different moods, you could say. And so different moods, allowing the words to influence different perspectives you may have at different times. So that's the same. And then the awakening practice, the practice itself that will help with bringing this lesson to life, is, okay, not in necessarily intense, problematic situations just yet. So that's the end goal, though. Like we said earlier, it's easier to do this kind of investigation under smaller difficulties, under smaller emotions, smaller problem moods, or whatever the case may be. So once again, not in necessarily intense problematic situations just yet, although this is the ultimate goal. Try building a new relationship with what you notice presently. Build a new relationship. Build a new relationship just by being attentive to what you notice. The shape of right here, right now. Pretty simple. So this week there's no journaling. I didn't want to muddy up the waters with any kind of journaling response. I really just felt this was a time to hold in mind the image of a morphing rock, of a shape-shifting rock, and practice seeing all three levels, physical, emotional, mental, as that shifting rock, and as a stable place to be attentive to build a new relationship with. So I didn't want to muddy up those waters by thinking about things, because this isn't really a place to actively use our mind. That's not the point of what we're doing on this. We're creating stability within our lives, and we're doing that by using the power of the moment itself, the power of the present moment, the power that grounding ourselves on this rock's shape in this moment, the power that has. And so we don't want to muddy it up with any kind of journaling this week. We're just going to do that practice. That's that, guys. Any thoughts or questions about the practice for this week? Okay. Well, we may just end. Yeah.
Could you give us another quick recap of the practice again?
Yeah, sure.
Just like
Yeah, sure. It is really super simple. It's just the image of a rock. And this particular rock is shape-shifting. And the reason why it's shape-shifting is because it's accounting for stuff that's moving. And the stuff that's moving is the physical level of experience, the emotional level of experience, and the mental level of experience. And so instead of those being three separate things, we're going to account for them all as one. Meaning we're lighting up, we're becoming aware of all level of our experience at the same time, and then as one thing. And so it may be moving in the moment, meaning there may be a thought that happens, but that's included. That's included, and we're going to ground ourselves on the reality of the shape of including that thought. Or that thought may even produce emotion, and so then there's a little bit of emotion over here, and so it's like there's the shape of that. Meaning we're just holding in mind the everything perceivable, the shape of our experience. And just by being attentive to that, just by being holding that in mind, we can start to build a new relationship with it. And what that really means is just by the sheer act of being attentive, we can start to rest into a different energy. And that energy will is what we were calling love, but essentially will be the energy that changes things in the way we wanted them changed by trying to figure things out. So rest with that rock, that morphing rock image, and see what happens.
Thank you.
Cool. You're welcome. All right, guys. We might actually end a couple minutes early this time. That never happens. So let me know what your guys' experience are throughout the week with this. And as always, I'll send you guys the PDF ASAP and also the recorded copy if anyone wants to revisit this. And I will see you guys this time next week.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Good night, guys.
Thanks. Good night.
You're welcome. Thank you. Good night.